Bonjour, ou plutôt bonsoir.
Marie-Odile Bertella Geffroy. Good evening. I'm here to talk about crimes. I used to be a judge. I'm now a lawyer. I have been working for 30 years on the environment and public health. Crime against the environment and with an impact on human health is not something that will be applied very soon in France. But in Italy, good news. In May of 2015, Italian legislators created the crime against the environment and health. In Italian, they call it disastro ambientale. It is an environmental disaster and a sanitary one. And I really insist on the term sanitary because when we talk about the environment, what it really entails is a right to life and a right to a healthy life. Of course, I was worked in penal courts, but penal courts are there to sanction crime, but also to prevent crime. I remember conducting a statistical survey of all the people who had been sentenced by the Court of Paris and the Cassation Court on environmental crimes. Most of the time, what they got was a fine at most. And when they were imprisoned, they were not for a very long time. So basically, they were given the right to pollute the world. And the multinational companies really enjoyed it. Penal courts are really the last resort, usually when an association of victims go to court for mass action, because otherwise, as individuals, they will not be able or not be in a position to go to court. And some people have said that justice or the law is a weapon. We have to use it. And that's why I became a lawyer. There are very few lawyers working in the field of environment and health. And I found that lawyers are so expensive that if you only have a small wage, there's no way you're going to be able to afford a lawyer. So you will get a pro bono lawyer, and the Victims Association have taken over. What will a judge do? Investigations. Maybe he will search the premises. He will do exactly the same thing that a prosecutor would do for a crime. But in France, crimes against the environment are not acknowledged as a crime. In Italy, the case law has evolved with the recent environmental disasters that have happened. Well, we're somewhere in between something that was done intentionally and the pre-intentional crimes. People are aware of the danger, but nothing is done. And doing nothing doesn't mean that you're not accountable in some way. So I'm a law specialist, and I can't resist this temptation of quoting Article 30 in the Rome Statute, and it's very important when somebody causes either death or illnesses in other people, or is aware of the fact that following the disaster, people will die or become sick. So it's an evolution of the law that is fantastic in Italy, but in France nothing happens. We'll hope that something will happen. We hope. I do. The national justice is very reluctant as far as public health issues are concerned. Associations obviously usually sue the public administration for not protecting the citizens, although they knew there was a danger. Take asbestos. An obvious example. Ever since 1906, people knew that asbestos was dangerous for the workers' health and that people could die. and yet they kept being exposed to asbestos. This is not something that French judges are very happy to do. They're very reluctant to sentence people who commit this kind of crime. And yet, prevention is exactly what should be done. Prevention, there's no other option. Prevention should be organized in Europe with an international or by the International Court of Justice. Why Europe? Because we could have a European prosecutor, not for normal crimes. There's going to be an international or European prosecutor for terrorism. Why not one for environmental crimes? Whether you live this or that side of the Alps. On one side in Italy, the multinational companies will be prosecuted and sentenced. Recently, 18 years imprisonment for the CEO of the Eternit kitchen-making company, and the prosecutor did a really good job, and 3.5 years of investigations. The 2 trials in court, and then the Court of Cassation could not follow. And this is the reason why the Italian law was voted in order to add to the case law. But what is the difference with France? There were 5 Eternit factories in France making kitchens. I conducted all the investigations exactly on the same level. Manslaughter, obviously, because this is not could not be considered as murder, but we prosecuted people for manslaughter. But I've been gone for the last 2 years and nothing has happened ever since. 3 trials for the asbestos problem, and still I don't see how in the near future we could imagine anything to happen for environmental crimes to become actual crimes acknowledged as such in France. What's the difference between Italy and France? Well, the difference is the independence of justice. Ever since 1982, in Italy, the prosecutors are totally independent from the Ministry of Justice, whereas in France, our prosecutors, public magistrates are directly connected with the judges. And if you're not aware of this, I'm telling you, because there's an aberration in France. France has already been sentenced several times by the Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. Nothing happens. The Hague Court also has sanctioned France more than the other countries to pay fines because European directives were not transposed in the French legislation. Europe is really pushing on. But, you know, they can't really make them do it. The states have a certain sovereignty in order to set up rules and regulations in some fields. And health and environment are not a priority in France. So Europe, with a European Court for Health and Environment, that would not be so difficult. Same thing as the Court for Public Administrators. Somebody mentioned the eco-mafia. Of course, the eco-mafia exists, and we need to think about it. But with Article 30 and Article 7 in the Statute of Rome, an environmental crime could be considered as a crime against humankind. Well, there was the explosion in the Seveso plant. I mean, even the name stayed. People now talk about Seveso factories. It was the first disaster, but there have been many others since, and yet nothing was done. Bhopal? Think of Bhopal in India. The people that didn't even get any kind of compensation. So compensation first, and then an in-depth investigation to understand the causes and the relationship between the diseases that people develop after an environmental disaster or an explosion. You remember the Rana Plaza building collapsing in Bangladesh. This is all due to negligence, and that should be sanctioned. Legislation must take steps forward so that it will also act as a preventative measure. On the international level, something is happening. I've said it, it's happening elsewhere, unfortunately not in France. The difference between individual responsibility and other people's and collective responsibility. You don't cut someone's face with a knife without having a reason. It means you hate that person. But now we move from an individual responsibility towards a collective accountability, liability. And asbestos was a catastrophe. After 20 or 30 years now, most people have died. They're no longer there to testify. And the people guilty, the guilty parties have died as well. And in some cases, the Red Brigades are not going to do anything. It means we need a court. And it's a change from individual responsibility to collective responsibility. Some things are done willingly, but sometimes a simple negligence can become a criminal act because you were negligent, thousands of people may become sick or die. Hundreds, thousands of people. And those disasters could have been avoided if people had taken the adequate decisions. And I'm sorry if I'm very open, but people should be scared of being arrested by the police. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. In 1971, regarding asbestos, there was a meeting in London. All the multinationals attended the meeting to agree that everybody would say that a wise use of asbestos was safe and that asbestos was not dangerous. And apparently they agreed and the agreement was implemented. The next problem will be waste. Asbestos waste is being discharged everywhere when the buildings are being cleaned of asbestos. And in some places like Canada, asbestos is not even forbidden. The Clemenceau warship was full of asbestos, and they sent the ship to India to remove the asbestos and dismantle the ship at a very low price. Fortunately, the Egyptians stopped it in the Suez Canal. Otherwise, it would have been dismantled by poor workers who would have gotten sick. In France, we pollute the earth, we pollute the ground. People die simply so that other people can make profit. And they don't care because they know they really will not be punished. And yet, it's a human right to live safe from pollution, safe from toxic waste. This right must be protected, and we have to scare some people. It takes a bit of scaring for things to improve, so that future generations inherit a planet that they can live on. We know for a fact, for instance, that some chemicals that disrupt the endocrine system can be forwarded from one generation to the next. I'm sorry, I'm running out of time. We're self-destructing, really. So if we don't want to end up the way the dinosaurs did, we have to do something. We can use justice, the law, the access to justice to change the world. Otherwise, the world is heading into the